They thought they had broken me. My husband and children believed that abandoning me, packing their bags for America and leaving me behind in shame, was the ultimate punishment. I remember the day they closed the door for the last time. No hugs, no tears, no words of comfort. Just silence and contempt. They thought they were cutting me off, severing me from love, dignity, and purpose. But what they didn't know was this: the day they walked away was the day I became free. What they meant for destruction became the soil of my revenge. Because life has a cruel irony, and the same hands that tried to bury me ended up planting me in a garden I never dreamed possible. The foundation of their so-called new life in America was tied, unknowingly, to me and the man they hated most. My punishment was their prison. My shame became their chain. But to understand how I got here, how I became the woman they thought they destroyed, you must go back to the beginning. Before betrayal, before exile, before revenge. You must know the story of Sarah Matthews, the orphan girl who thought love would save her. The night my parents died is etched in my mind like a scar that will never heal. I was 17, sitting in the living room, waiting for them to return from a wedding. The phone rang close to midnight. On the other end was a police officer, his voice too calm for the storm he carried. There had been an accident. A truck had lost its brakes, colliding with their car on the highway. Neither of them survived. In one phone call, my world crumbled. My younger sister, barely 15 at the time, wailed like a wounded bird while I stood frozen. We were alone. No inheritance, no extended family willing to shoulder the responsibility. Just two broken girls staring into a future as dark as the night that swallowed our parents. For months, survival became our only goal. We sold off the little property we had to cover school fees. I juggled small jobs, cleaning houses, tutoring kids, to keep us afloat. But despair weighed heavily. University admission came like a cruel joke. How could I afford it when I could barely feed us? That was when Thomas appeared. He wasn't a stranger. He had been my late brother's close friend in high school, 3 years older, tall, ambitious, always with a seriousness that made him seem older than he was. I hadn't seen him in years until he showed up one afternoon with groceries. He said he had heard of our loss and wanted to help. At first, I resisted. Pity was unbearable. But Thomas was persistent. He quietly paid my tuition fees, ensured my sister remained in school, and visited often with the kind of steady reliability that began to feel like security. Slowly, his presence became a lifeline. Looking back now, I realized Thomas wasn't just helping out of kindness. He was building something, an unspoken bond of dependence. I was too broken, too grateful to see it then. University was hard. Every day, I battled between focusing on lectures and worrying about my sister back home. But Thomas always reassured me. Just study, Sarah. Leave the rest to me. His voice carried authority, a tone that didn't ask but instructed. I obeyed because I had no choice. When I graduated, Thomas was there waiting, smiling with pride as if he had carved my success with his own hands. That evening, he proposed. His words were simple. I've seen you at your worst. I want to be there for the rest. Let's build a life together. How could I say no? I was indebted to him in ways that went beyond money. He had saved me from drowning, and gratitude disguised itself as love. Within months, we were married. Those first years were gentle. We lived modestly, but we were happy, or at least I believed we were. I laughed again, dreamed again. For the first time since my parents' death, I felt anchored. Thomas worked long hours, but every night he came home to me. We talked about children, about building a family that would fill the empty spaces our pasts had carved out. But fate is never kind for long. 2 years into our marriage, when pregnancy hadn't come, I went for tests. The doctor's words were knives to my chest. Your womb is weak. Conceiving may be difficult, may be impossible. I remember crying into Thomas's chest that night, begging him to forgive me, to release me if he wanted. But he shook his head firmly. Love is enough, Sarah. Children will come, but even if they don't, I'm not going anywhere. And I believed him. For a while, his words gave me strength. We carried on with life, traveling when we could, enjoying the small joys of marriage. But beneath my smiles was a constant fear, That one day my inability to give him a child would poison the love we built. I was wrong about when that poison would enter our lives. It wouldn't come from me. It would come from someone we both trusted. Someone whose presence seemed harmless at first but would eventually unravel everything. His name was Nicholas. And with him, my story would change forever. If chapter 1 of my life was about loss, then chapter 2 was about salvation. Thomas, the man who stepped into the ruins of my world, became not only a rescuer but a builder of the foundation I thought I needed. To everyone else, he was a gentleman, steady, reliable, protective. To me, he was oxygen when I was suffocating. But now, years later, when I think back, I see it differently. He wasn't only saving me, he was shaping me into someone who owed him everything. After my parents' death, life was a series of survival tests. My younger sister, Grace, was fragile, consumed by grief. I had to be strong for both of us, but I was only 17, a child myself. Thomas entered that fragile space like a storm disguised as a shelter. He brought groceries the first time, but then it became more. School fees appeared mysteriously paid. Grace's uniforms were bought without my asking. Sometimes I would come home from tutoring jobs to find that the electricity bill had been settled. It was as if an invisible hand was guiding my life back into stability, and that hand was Thomas's. At first, I protested. "You don't have to do this," I would tell him. He would smile in that calm way of his and reply, "Sarah, let me do what your parents would have wanted. They would have wanted you to finish school." That line always silenced me. I couldn't argue with the memory of my parents. Gratitude grew roots in my heart, wrapping itself tightly around him. During my university years, Thomas was constant. He was 3 years older and already working in a bank, which made him seem mature, dependable. He came to campus occasionally, sometimes bringing food, sometimes dropping off money, but always reminding me, "You're not alone." In those moments, I felt both blessed and indebted. Every exam I passed, every semester I survived, felt stamped with his name. My degree would not just be mine, it would be ours. By the time I graduated, my sister Grace had finished high school. Thomas made sure she didn't lack either, though she was always more skeptical of his help than I was. "Be careful, Sarah," she once whispered. "Sometimes people give because they expect something back." I brushed her off. Not Thomas. He's different. He's been nothing but good to us. I wanted to believe that so badly. The night Thomas proposed, he didn't take me to a fancy restaurant or kneel in some dramatic public space. He simply showed up at my small apartment with a modest ring and said, "Sarah, I've seen you at your lowest. I want to see you through every chapter of your life. Let's build a home together." Tears filled my eyes. How could I refuse? He had been there when no one else was. Saying yes felt less like a choice and more like fulfilling a debt of gratitude. The wedding was small, but it was beautiful. Grace stood by my side as maid of honor, though her eyes carried the same wary look I had seen before. "You're sure?" she asked me once more, as if she knew something I didn't. "Yes," I answered without hesitation. "He's the reason I'm even here today." And so I became Sarah Matthews, the wife of a man who had stitched my broken life back together. The early years of marriage were gentle. We lived in a small but cozy apartment, filled with laughter, music, and dreams. Thomas would come home from work with stories about clients and colleagues, while I shared my plans of finding a teaching job. On weekends, we strolled through the park, holding hands like teenagers in love. I believed, truly believed, that I had finally found happiness again. That love had rescued me from despair. But cracks began to show, small at first, like hairline fractures on glass. 2 years in, I still wasn't pregnant. At first, Thomas brushed it off, assuring me that we had plenty of time. But society is never silent. Relatives whispered. Friends asked when we were going to have a child. Their questions were daggers, and each one cut deeper. Finally, I went for tests. The diagnosis was devastating. My womb was weak. Carrying a pregnancy to term might be impossible. I remember coming home with the report in my hand, my knees trembling. "Thomas," I whispered, handing him the envelope. He read it quietly, then folded it back up. "I married you, Sarah," he said firmly. "Not your womb. Love is enough." Those words wrapped around me like a blanket. For nights afterward, I clung to him, believing that we could weather this storm together. But something unspoken lingered between us. I saw it in his eyes when friends announced their pregnancies, when relatives brought over their children. It wasn't blame, it was longing, a hunger that love alone couldn't satisfy. And though he never said it, I carried the guilt like a second skin. Still, life moved on. Thomas worked hard, climbing the ladder at his bank. His dedication was admirable, but it also meant long hours away from home. I filled my time with teaching, volunteering, and caring for our small apartment, but loneliness began to creep in, especially during nights when his side of the bed stayed cold. That loneliness became a shadow that followed me everywhere. And into that shadow stepped Nicholas, the man who would change everything. At first, he was just a name in Thomas's stories, an old friend from high school. But one evening, Thomas came home with him, introducing him as if he were family. Nicholas was charming, confident, the kind of man who carried himself like he owned every room he entered. I didn't know it then, but his arrival was the beginning of a new chapter. One that would test everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and survival. Every marriage begins with a promise, and ours was no different. "Love is enough," Thomas told me the night we received the doctor's verdict. I clung to those words like scripture, believing them to be the anchor that would keep us steady through every storm. For a while, it worked. Hope became the glue that held us together, even as reality chipped at the edges of our dreams. The first 3 years of our marriage were filled with small joys. Our apartment wasn't grand, but it was ours. We filled it with second-hand furniture, thrift store decorations, and laughter that made the walls feel alive. Thomas would bring home little surprises, flowers from a street vendor, takeout from my favorite diner, or simply a handwritten note tucked into my books. I tried to give him the kind of home he deserved. I cooked, kept everything spotless, and learned the rhythm of his days so I could anticipate his needs. To outsiders, we were the perfect young couple. 2 people building a life from scratch with nothing but love and determination. But behind closed doors, the silence of an empty crib haunted us. Month after month, I waited for good news, only to be met with disappointment. Each time, Thomas would hold me and remind me, "Love is enough." But even in his arms, I could feel the unspoken yearning. The pressure grew heavier with time. Friends began having children, and family gatherings turned into minefields of questions. "When are you two going to give us good news? What's taking so long?" Each word felt like a dagger, though they were spoken casually. I remember one Sunday at church, when a woman placed her hand on my belly and said, "I pray next year, you'll come here with your baby." I smiled politely, but the moment we got home, I collapsed in tears. Thomas comforted me as best as he could, but the unspoken truth was clear: the world didn't care that love was enough. The world demanded proof of our union, a child. It was in the middle of this storm that Thomas reconnected with Nicholas. They had been inseparable in high school, and when they ran into each other at a business conference, it was as if no time had passed. Nicholas was magnetic, confident, successful, and full of stories that drew everyone in. He was the kind of man who seemed to know the right thing to say at every moment. Soon, he became a regular guest in our home. At first, it was refreshing. His presence lightened Thomas's mood, and I enjoyed listening to their laughter echo through the apartment. I thought Nicholas was a blessing, a friend who gave my husband a sense of joy that work had drained from him. But life has a cruel way of weaving irony into blessings. In our 4th year of marriage, when I had nearly accepted that I would never conceive, something unimaginable happened. I missed my period. Then another. At first, I didn't dare hope, but when the doctor confirmed it, I nearly fainted from joy. I was pregnant. I can still picture Thomas's face when I told him. His eyes widened in disbelief before filling with tears. He held me so tightly I could hardly breathe. "Sarah, do you know what this means? Our prayers have been answered." For weeks, our home felt like a sanctuary again. We painted the nursery, argued playfully about baby names, and dreamed of the future we once thought impossible. I finally felt complete, as if God had heard my cries and decided to heal the brokenness inside me. The pregnancy wasn't easy. My body, already fragile, struggled under the strain. Bed rest became necessary, and Thomas's job kept him away more often than I wanted. That was when Nicholas stepped in, offering to check on me when Thomas traveled. At first, it was harmless. He brought groceries, helped with chores, and made sure I didn't feel alone. Thomas trusted him completely, often saying, "If I can't be here, at least I know Nicholas is." I told myself it was kindness, nothing more. But sometimes, when Nicholas lingered a little too long after dropping something off, I felt a strange warmth, one I pushed aside immediately. I was a married woman, and I loved my husband. Gratitude was one thing. Temptation was another. Still, the seed had been planted. 9 months later, against all odds, I delivered a healthy baby girl. Holding her in my arms was the closest I had ever felt to heaven. Her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and I knew I would never be the same. We named her Emily. Thomas was radiant, proudly showing her off to anyone who visited. For a brief time, we were everything I had ever dreamed, a family. The whispers of infertility were silenced, replaced with congratulations and envy. We had beaten the odds. But life never stays still for long. Emily's arrival brought joy, but it also brought distance. Thomas, now more invested in his career to provide for us, spent longer hours at work and more nights on business trips. Emily and I were often alone, and though I adored her, the weight of motherhood combined with loneliness was heavy. Nicholas remained present, always dependable, always kind. He became Emily's Uncle Nick, someone she recognized and adored. His laughter filled the spaces Thomas's absence left behind. I should have seen it then. The path was already being laid, stone by stone, toward something dangerous. But I was blinded by gratitude, by exhaustion, by the illusion that I was still in control of my story. I didn't know then that my miracle child was not the end of our struggles, it was only the beginning of the unraveling. Miracles don't always erase scars. Sometimes, they simply cover them long enough for you to forget they're there. When Emily was born, I believed I was healed, that the label of barren had been stripped from me forever. For a year, our home was filled with laughter, lullabies, and the sweet chaos of parenthood. But deep inside, I knew the battle with my womb wasn't over. Doctors had warned me after Emily's birth. "You were lucky," they said. "Your body struggled. If you try again, it may not hold." I heard their words, but I buried them. Thomas wanted more children. His eyes glistened whenever he held Emily, but they also carried a hunger I recognized, the dream of a fuller family. So, despite the risks, we tried again. Months passed. Each negative pregnancy test was another silent failure, another dagger of guilt. I began to feel cursed, as if God had granted me Emily only to mock me afterward. My body, still fragile, betrayed me again and again. Thomas grew more restless during this time. His career was soaring thanks to Nicholas, who had helped him land a senior role at an international firm. With the promotion came constant travel, late-night meetings, and a growing distance I couldn't bridge. "Be patient, Sarah," he would say whenever I expressed loneliness. "I'm doing this for us, for Emily's future." But what good was a future if the present was slipping away? Our conversations became shorter, our moments of intimacy fewer. He was drifting, not in love, but in presence. And into that emptiness stepped Nicholas. Nicholas had a way of making himself indispensable. He was always around, fixing the leaky sink, buying Emily toys, or simply keeping me company when Thomas was away. At first, I welcomed it. Loneliness is a dangerous hunger, and his presence felt like a meal I hadn't realized I was starving for. I remember one particular evening. Emily had just turned 3. Thomas was away on yet another trip, and I had fallen sick with a fever. Nicholas stopped by with soup and medicine. He tucked Emily into bed, then sat with me until my fever broke. "You shouldn't do this," I whispered, guilt pricking at me. He shrugged. "Thomas asked me to look after you. Besides, you're family." The word family lingered in the air, heavier than it should have been. When Emily turned 4, I became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was even more difficult. I spent weeks in bed, my body weak, my emotions fragile. Thomas, buried in work, called often but couldn't always come home. It was Nicholas who drove me to the hospital for checkups, who held my hand when the contractions started too soon. Against all odds, I delivered a son. We named him Daniel. For a while, it seemed as though the storm had passed. With 2 children, I thought I had finally fulfilled my role as a wife and mother. Our home was filled with joy again. Birthdays, family pictures, moments of happiness that felt almost perfect. But perfection never lasts. Thomas's absence became more permanent. His job demanded it, or so he said. Weeks turned into months of him being gone, and when he was home, his mind seemed elsewhere. He still loved the children, no doubt, but his affection for me was quieter, restrained, as if he were holding back something unspoken. I confronted him once. "Thomas, are you unhappy?" I asked late one night. He sighed, pulling me into his arms. "No, Sarah. I'm just tired. This is what providing looks like. Sacrifice." But even as he spoke, I felt the distance. Sacrifice had become his excuse. Nicholas, on the other hand, was always present. Emily adored him. Daniel reached for him as though he were an uncle by blood. He knew their favorite snacks, their bedtime stories, the little quirks that only a parent should know. At first, I convinced myself it was innocent. But there were moments, brief, fleeting, when our eyes met and lingered too long, when his hand brushed mine and left a spark behind, when his words carried a weight that wasn't entirely friendly. I fought it. I told myself it was wrong. I reminded myself of my vows, of my gratitude to Thomas. But loneliness doesn't ask for permission. It creeps in quietly, softening your resistance until the line between right and wrong blurs. The breaking point came one rainy evening. Thomas had left for another trip, promising to return in 2 weeks. Emily was asleep, Daniel in his crib, and I sat in the living room, weary from the day. Nicholas arrived unexpectedly, dripping wet from the rain. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, handing me a bag of groceries. We talked for hours, about life, about dreams, about disappointments. Somewhere in the middle of that conversation, I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. It startled me. When the laughter faded, silence filled the room. Our eyes met, and something unspoken passed between us. Before I could stop myself, before reason could intervene, he leaned in and kissed me. I froze, heart pounding, guilt screaming inside me. But I didn't pull away. That single kiss cracked open a door I thought I had locked forever. And once it was open, there was no turning back. Looking back now, I see how inevitable it was. My womb, my marriage, my loneliness, they had all conspired to lead me to that moment. I didn't plan it, didn't want it, but when Nicholas's lips met mine, a hunger I had buried for years surfaced. It was the beginning of a secret that would consume us both. Some betrayals don't begin with hatred, they begin with kindness. That's how it was with Nicholas. After that first kiss, guilt consumed me, but so did relief. For years, I had carried the weight of being unseen, unheard, and unloved in the ways that mattered. That single moment with him whispered what my heart had been starving for, attention. I told myself it was a mistake, a lapse of judgment. But mistakes are easy to repeat when they fill an emptiness. The morning after, Nicholas texted me. "I'm sorry if I crossed a line. I shouldn't have. But know this, you're not invisible, Sarah. You matter. Don't forget that." I read those words over and over, my heart torn between fear and longing. Thomas had never made me feel invisible, at least not in the beginning. But years of absence had dulled his devotion. Nicholas's words pierced through that fog like light through a locked room. I didn't reply immediately. But 3 days later, when he stopped by to drop off groceries for the children, our eyes met again, and the silence between us was louder than words. It didn't happen all at once. It began with long conversations after the kids went to bed. He would sit at the dining table while I washed dishes, and would talk about music, books, even politics. His laughter filled the spaces Thomas used to occupy. Then came the subtle touches, his hand brushing against mine when passing a plate, his arm around me when I grew emotional. Each touch was a spark, reminding me of the fire I thought had long gone out. By the time Thomas returned from his trip, nothing physical had happened beyond that kiss. But emotionally, I had already stepped onto forbidden ground. Thomas, exhausted from travel, barely noticed the shift. He kissed the children, asked about school, then buried himself in work emails even at the dinner table. I tried to talk to him, to share the loneliness I felt, but his replies were short. "Sarah, you worry too much," he said one night when I expressed my fears. "Nicholas is around to help. Isn't that enough?" Enough. It stung that he thought my need for connection could be outsourced, as if Nicholas could substitute for a husband's presence. Ironically, that was exactly what was happening. The affair began in earnest 2 weeks later. It was another night of rain, another evening of shared laughter that blurred into silence. This time, when Nicholas leaned in, I didn't hesitate. Our lips met, and the dam broke. Every suppressed desire, every lonely night, every tear I had swallowed over the years spilled into that kiss. What followed was a betrayal I can never erase. The guilt was immediate, sharp, and suffocating. Afterward, I sat at the edge of the bed, trembling. "This is wrong," I whispered. Nicholas, still catching his breath, said quietly, "Then why does it feel so right?" I had no answer. From that night, we slipped into a rhythm that was both intoxicating and terrifying. When Thomas traveled, Nicholas filled the void. He was there to read Emily bedtime stories, to rock Daniel to sleep, to sit with me on the porch when loneliness threatened to swallow me whole. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. He listened to me. He asked about my dreams, about the pain of losing my parents, about the struggles with my womb. He remembered the small details Thomas had long forgotten. But with every secret moment, the risk grew heavier. I became hyper-aware of Thomas's presence. Every question he asked felt like an accusation, even if it wasn't. Every time he looked at me, I wondered if he saw the guilt etched on my face. Yet, strangely, he never seemed suspicious. In fact, his trust in Nicholas was almost blind. One evening, he even said, "I don't know what I'd do without Nicholas. He's like a brother to me, and to us." The words cut deep. I forced a smile, but inside I was unraveling. I was betraying not just my husband but the man he trusted most. As months turned into years, the double life became harder to manage. Nicholas and I grew skilled at disguising our closeness, but children notice more than we think. Emily, now 6, once asked, "Mommy, why does Uncle Nicholas visit more than Daddy?" I froze, my heart pounding. "He just helps us," I said quickly. But the question lingered, a reminder that secrets are never truly safe. And yet, despite the fear, despite the guilt, I couldn't walk away. Nicholas had become my refuge. He was the calm in my storm, the voice that reminded me I was more than a wife waiting for her husband to come home. But love built on betrayal is a fragile thing. I knew it couldn't last forever. Still, in those stolen nights, when his arms wrapped around me and I forgot the emptiness of my marriage, I let myself believe it could. What I didn't know was that every secret leaves a trail. And soon, the trail would lead straight to Thomas. The storm was coming, I just didn't see it yet. Trust doesn't always shatter with a loud crash. Sometimes it begins with hairline fractures, so small, you barely notice them until the whole thing collapses. That's how my marriage started to feel after Nicholas and I crossed the line. Thomas had always trusted me, but trust makes people blind. For months, I thought I could keep up the charade, the dutiful wife, the patient mother, the woman who simply leaned on her husband's best friend when he was away. But guilt changes people. It changes the way you laugh, the way you touch, even the way you breathe. And soon, Thomas began to notice. It started with the phone calls. Nicholas would text me at odd hours, little things like, "How are you holding up?" or "Did Daniel finally fall asleep?" Once, Thomas caught my phone buzzing late at night. "Who's that?" he asked, groggy but alert. I panicked. "It's Nicholas. Just checking in." His eyebrows furrowed slightly. "At midnight?" I shrugged. "He worries about the kids." Thomas didn't press further, but the look in his eyes lingered long after he turned back to sleep. Then there were the visits. Nicholas had always come around, but now it was more frequent, more purposeful. He fixed the broken cabinet, changed the car tires, even painted Emily's room. To anyone else, it might have seemed like generosity. To Thomas, it slowly became a question. "Why does he come here so much?" he asked one Saturday morning while watching Nicholas play soccer with Emily in the yard. I forced a smile. "Because you're never around." The words slipped out sharper than I intended. His jaw tightened. "I'm working for us, Sarah. Don't twist it." I bit my tongue, but inside, resentment brewed. Was it so wrong that I craved presence over provision? The cracks widened further when Thomas returned from a trip earlier than expected. I hadn't known he was coming, and Nicholas had just left after dinner. As Thomas unpacked his suitcase, he asked casually, "Was Nicholas here today?" I froze for a fraction of a second before replying, "Yes. He brought groceries." He nodded, but his silence after that was heavier than any accusation. My guilt began to show in other ways, too. I became overly attentive, cooking Thomas's favorite meals, forcing smiles, and initiating conversations. Instead of reassuring him, it made him suspicious. One evening, as I served dinner, he looked at me carefully and asked, "Is there something you're not telling me?" My heart skipped. "Of course not. Why would you ask that?" He sighed. "You just feel different. Like you're here, but not really." I laughed it off, but inside, fear gripped me. Could he see it? Could he feel the betrayal in my silence? Meanwhile, Nicholas grew bolder. He would squeeze my hand when Thomas wasn't looking, whisper inside jokes that only we shared, linger too long in conversations. It was subtle, but subtlety is dangerous. Emily, ever observant, once blurted out, "Uncle Nicholas makes Mommy smile more than Daddy." The room went silent. My face burned. Thomas forced a laugh, but the seed had been planted. That night, as we lay in bed, he asked softly, "Do you love me, Sarah?" Tears pricked my eyes. "Of course I do." But the conviction in my voice faltered, and he noticed. The guilt was eating me alive. I prayed at night, begging God for forgiveness, vowing to end things with Nicholas. But every time I tried, he'd say the words I longed to hear. "You deserve more than loneliness. You deserve someone who sees you. You deserve me." And against my better judgment, I believed him. The turning point came during Daniel's birthday party. The house was full of balloons, laughter, and neighbors. Thomas had returned from a trip just the night before, exhausted but present. Nicholas, as always, was there, helping set up decorations, carrying the cake, taking pictures of the children. At one point, I caught Thomas watching me as Nicholas handed me a slice of cake. His eyes narrowed, not in anger but in realization. Something inside him clicked that day. Later that night, after the guests left and the children were asleep, he confronted me. "Sarah," he said quietly, "are you in love with him?" My chest tightened. "What? No. Of course not." He studied me, his gaze piercing. "You didn't answer right away." I turned away, tears threatening to spill. "Thomas, please don't ask me things like that." He didn't press further, but from that night onward, our marriage carried a silence that screamed louder than words. I began to sense that the walls were closing in. What had once been a refuge with Nicholas was now a cage of lies. Every kiss, every touch, every whispered word felt tainted with fear. And yet, I couldn't stop. Because the truth was this: Nicholas had become more than a secret. He had become addicted. And addictions rarely end without destruction. Looking back, I realized that was the season when everything began to unravel. The cracks were no longer invisible, they were spreading fast, threatening to bring the entire foundation of my marriage crashing down. And when foundations break, they don't just hurt the people who built them. They bury everyone standing on top. Secrets have a way of leaving crumbs behind. A word spoken too softly, a glance that lingers too long, a moment of silence that feels louder than thunder. For years, I thought Nicholas and I were careful. But Thomas wasn't a fool. His love for me had made him blind, but blindness doesn't last forever. The first crack came in the form of a receipt. One evening, Thomas was sorting through the mail when he found a folded piece of paper tucked inside the day's bills. "What's this?" he asked, holding it up. I froze. It was from a restaurant across town, an expensive one where Nicholas had taken me weeks earlier. I had stuffed the receipt into my purse and forgotten about it. Must have been a mistake, I stammered. Maybe it was left in my bag. He didn't reply. He just looked at me with eyes that were no longer trusting, no longer blind. After that, the silence between us grew heavier. He started asking questions differently, measured, probing, as though he was testing every word I said. Did Nicholas stop by today? Where were you when I called earlier? Why didn't you tell me you went downtown? Each question chipped away at the fragile walls I had built around my secret. Then came the night he returned early from another trip. I hadn't expected him, and neither had Nicholas. Thomas walked in just as Nicholas was handing me a grocery bag in the kitchen. Nothing inappropriate happened, but the look on Thomas's face said everything. Again? He asked coldly. Nicholas was just, I began. Helping. Always helping. His tone was sharp, his eyes darting between us. Nicholas cleared his throat. I should go. Yes, Thomas said, his jaw tight. You should. That night, Thomas didn't sleep beside me. He lay on the couch, and the distance between us grew into a canyon. The children sensed it too. Emily asked me one morning, why is Daddy so sad? I forced a smile. He's just tired, sweetheart. But deep inside, I knew it was more than fatigue. It was betrayal, slowly sinking into his bones. The final straw came weeks later. Thomas had been unusually quiet, watching me with an intensity that unnerved me. Then one afternoon, as I was folding laundry, he walked in holding my phone. Who's N? He asked. My heart stopped. Nicholas had texted earlier. Tonight. I snatched the phone. It's not what you think. His voice trembled, not with confusion, but with rage barely contained. Don't lie to me, Sarah. Not anymore. Tears welled in my eyes. Thomas, please. How long? He demanded. I couldn't speak. My silence was confession enough. He turned away, running his hands through his hair as though trying to keep his world from collapsing. My best friend, he muttered. The man I trusted with my family. And you. His voice cracked. You, Sarah. After everything I did for you. I reached out, but he stepped back, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and disgust. Don't, he said firmly. Don't touch me. That night, he didn't yell. He didn't break things. His silence was far worse. It was the silence of a man shattered beyond repair. The days that followed were unbearable. He avoided me, speaking only when necessary, directing his attention solely to the children. When we shared the same room, the air was thick with unspoken words. I begged for forgiveness. Thomas, please, it was a mistake. I still love you. He looked at me with hollow eyes. Love. Do you even know what that means? I had no answer. Nicholas, sensing the tension, tried to keep his distance, but it was too late. The damage had been done. The truth was out, and no amount of distance could erase it. One evening, Thomas confronted him. I wasn't there, but Nicholas told me later. He looked me in the eye, Nicholas said, his voice heavy. He didn't yell. He just said, I trusted you with my life. You were my brother. And you stabbed me in the back. Nicholas paused, guilt flickering in his expression. I've never seen him look so broken. But Thomas's pain didn't stop with Nicholas. It spread to the children. He grew more protective of them, shielding them from me in subtle ways. He began to make decisions without consulting me, as though I no longer had the right to be a partner. The foundation of our marriage wasn't just cracked anymore. It was crumbling. One night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I realized something chilling. Forgiveness might never come. Thomas wasn't the type to shout, to rage, to destroy. He was the type to remember. To let betrayal simmer until it turned into something unmovable. And in that moment, I understood. My greatest enemy wasn't Nicholas, or even my own guilt. It was Thomas's silence. The unmasking had happened. The truth was out. And with it, the life I had once known was slipping through my fingers. The only question left was, how much more would I lose before the end? Children see more than we think. They might not understand the complexities of betrayal, but they can feel the weight of silence, the sharpness of looks, and the distance that grows between two people who once laughed together. My children began to see me differently long before I realized it. At first, it was subtle. Emily, now 7, stopped running to me first when she came home from school. Instead, she sought out Thomas, her tiny arms wrapping around his waist as though he were her only safe harbor. Daniel, just a toddler, mirrored his sister. He clung to his father's leg more often, his giggles reserved for Thomas. I noticed, but I told myself it was normal. Children go through phases. But deep inside, I knew the truth. Thomas's silence had begun to seep into their bones. One evening during dinner, Emily asked a question that pierced me like a knife. "Daddy," she said, looking from him to me, "why don't you smile at Mommy anymore?" Thomas froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. My heart pounded in my chest. "I'm just tired," he replied, forcing a smile for her sake. "Work makes me tired." But Emily wasn't convinced. She turned to me, her young eyes filled with confusion. "Did you make Daddy sad?" I forced a laugh, but my throat burned. "No, sweetheart. Mommy loves Daddy very much." The words tasted like ash. The house changed after that. Where once there had been warmth, now there was division. Thomas never spoke ill of me directly, but children don't need words to learn bitterness. They saw how he avoided my touch, how his voice softened only for them, how he never looked at me the way he used to. Slowly, they mirrored him. Emily began correcting me, as though I were the child. "Daddy says you should do it this way," she'd remark when I folded laundry. "Daddy says Nicholas isn't family," she whispered once, her little brow furrowed as if trying to piece together a puzzle too heavy for her age. I tried to explain, to reassure her, but every word I said seemed to widen the gap. The hardest blow came from Daniel. One afternoon, he tripped in the yard, scraping his knee. I rushed to comfort him, but he pulled away, crying, "I want Daddy." I froze, my arm still outstretched, the rejection slicing through me deeper than the sharpest blade. Later that night, as I sat alone in the living room, I realized the cruel irony. I had sought comfort in Nicholas because I felt invisible, yet now my own children were making me invisible in my own home. The tension escalated when Thomas began spending more time alone with the kids. He took them on weekend trips without me, enrolled them in activities that required his presence, and subtly positioned himself as their anchor. When I asked if I could join, his responses were short. "Maybe next time. They need space. It's better this way." Better for who? Certainly not for me. I tried harder. I baked cookies, planned family game nights, offered to help with school projects. But the children's enthusiasm dimmed whenever I was involved. One evening, Emily whispered to her brother when she thought I couldn't hear, "Don't tell Mommy. Daddy won't like it." It was then I realized, I wasn't just losing my husband. I was losing my children, one by one. The breaking point came on Emily's 8th birthday. I had planned the party for weeks, decorating the house with balloons and baking her favorite chocolate cake. When she blew out her candles, I leaned in to hug her, but she turned away, choosing instead to throw her arms around Thomas. "Thank you, Daddy," she squealed. I stood there, smiling for the camera, but inside, my heart was breaking. Later that night, as I tucked her into bed, I asked softly, "Did you like your party?" She nodded. "And the cake?" "It was good," she said flatly, then added, "But Daddy makes me happier than you do." The words crushed me. My own child saw me as the cause of sorrow rather than joy. From then on, everything I did seemed to backfire. If I scolded them, they ran to Thomas. If I tried to discipline gently, they ignored me. I was becoming a stranger in my own home, reduced to the role of caretaker rather than mother. The night Thomas told me he was considering moving the family abroad, Emily's reaction sealed my fate. "Yay! Daddy, can we go soon?" she shouted, her face glowing with excitement. "And Mommy?" I asked, my voice trembling. Emily looked at me, then back at Thomas. "Do we have to take her?" Her words were innocent in tone, but deadly in meaning. Thomas didn't correct her. He didn't say, "Of course Mommy is coming." He just stayed silent. And in that silence, I realized the truth. My children no longer saw me as their mother. The betrayal of a husband is one wound. The betrayal of your own children, whether intentional or not, is another altogether. Their little eyes, once filled with love, now looked at me with doubt, confusion, and distance. I had lost them. And in losing them, I understood that my punishment had only just begun. The announcement didn't come as a family discussion. It wasn't a warm evening around the dinner table where dreams of a new life abroad were shared. No, like everything else that had slowly unraveled in my life, it came in whispers, half-truths, and deliberate silence. I first noticed the signs when Thomas started receiving late-night calls. He'd step outside, speaking in hushed tones. His laptop became his constant companion, documents and emails flashing across the screen before he quickly closed it whenever I entered the room. At first, I convinced myself it was just work. But the unease in my chest grew. Something was happening, and I was on the outside looking in. The truth revealed itself one Saturday morning when Emily rushed into the living room, clutching a glossy brochure. "Daddy! Daddy! Look at the schools in London. They have art clubs and soccer teams. I want to go there." London. The word hit me like a blow. "What schools?" I asked, reaching for the brochure, but Emily pulled it away. "Daddy said we're moving. He said it'll be better for us." I turned to Thomas, my voice trembling. "Moving? Since when? And why wasn't I told?" Thomas set down his coffee mug, his expression cold, calculated. "Because I wasn't sure how to tell you. The children and we're leaving. It's already in motion." My heart dropped. The children and you. What about me? His silence was louder than any words. In the weeks that followed, I became a ghost haunting my own home. The children were brimming with excitement, packing, making lists, showing each other pictures of neighborhoods, schools, and parks overseas. They included Thomas in every conversation, but never me. When I tried to join in, asking what neighborhood they were moving to or which school they'd chosen, Emily shrugged and Daniel avoided eye contact. Thomas never corrected them, never reminded them that I was still their mother. Instead, he let the divide widen, brick by brick. One evening, I confronted him in the kitchen. "Thomas, you can't just take my children away. I'm their mother. I deserve to be part of this decision." He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You lost that right the day you betrayed me. You gave me no choice, Sarah. The kids deserve a fresh start, away from the mess you created." Tears burned my eyes. I made a mistake, but I'm still their mother. You can't erase me from their lives. "Watch me," he said coldly. The betrayal was staggering, not just as a wife, but as a mother. I had carried those children, endured sleepless nights, kissed scraped knees, and held them through fevers. Yet now, they looked at me like I was a shadow, irrelevant to their future. Emily once told me, "Daddy said things will be happier there. No more fighting. Just us and him." The words gutted me. I wanted to scream, "There is no fighting. There's only silence. A silence your father has chosen." But I swallowed my pain. The day they packed the suitcases, the house felt like a funeral. I stood by the doorway, watching Thomas fold Daniel's shirts neatly, Emily stuffing her favorite dolls into her pink suitcase. They didn't ask me to help. They didn't even look at me. "Where exactly are you going?" I finally asked. Thomas zipped up his bag and glanced at me with disdain. "England. A friend of mine helped arrange the move. We've got a house waiting." I knew then it was Nicholas. Who else could it be? His presence lingered like a ghost, even when he wasn't in the room. On the morning of their departure, Emily hugged Thomas tightly. Daniel clutched his father's hand, his eyes sparkling with excitement. But Emily wasn't convinced. She turned to me, her young eyes filled with confusion. "Did you make Daddy sad?" I forced a laugh, but my throat burned. "No, sweetheart. Mommy loves Daddy very much." The words tasted like ash. The house changed after that. Where once there had been warmth, now there was division. Thomas never spoke ill of me directly, but children don't need words to learn bitterness. They saw how he avoided my touch, how his voice softened only for them, how he never looked at me the way he used to. Slowly, they mirrored him. Emily began correcting me, as though I were the child. "Daddy says you should do it this way," she'd remark when I folded laundry. "Daddy says Nicholas isn't family," she whispered once, her little brow furrowed as if trying to piece together a puzzle too heavy for her age. I tried to explain, to reassure her, but every word I said seemed to widen the gap. The hardest blow came from Daniel. One afternoon, he tripped in the yard, scraping his knee. I rushed to comfort him, but he pulled away, crying, "I want Daddy." I froze, my arm still outstretched, the rejection slicing through me deeper than the sharpest blade. Later that night, as I sat alone in the living room, I realized the cruel irony. I had sought comfort in Nicholas because I felt invisible, yet now my own children were making me invisible in my own home. The tension escalated when Thomas began spending more time alone with the kids. He took them on weekend trips without me, enrolled them in activities that required his presence, and subtly positioned himself as their anchor. When I asked if I could join, his responses were short. "Maybe next time. They need space. It's better this way." Better for who? Certainly not for me. I tried harder. I baked cookies, planned family game nights, offered to help with school projects. But the children's enthusiasm dimmed whenever I was involved. One evening, Emily whispered to her brother when she thought I couldn't hear, "Don't tell Mommy. Daddy won't like it." It was then I realized, I wasn't just losing my husband. I was losing my children, one by one. The breaking point came on Emily's 8th birthday. I had planned the party for weeks, decorating the house with balloons and baking her favorite chocolate cake. When she blew out her candles, I leaned in to hug her, but she turned away, choosing instead to throw her arms around Thomas. "Thank you, Daddy," she squealed. I stood there, smiling for the camera, but inside, my heart was breaking. Later that night, as I tucked her into bed, I asked softly, "Did you like your party?" She nodded. "And the cake?" "It was good," she said flatly, then added, "But Daddy makes me happier than you do." The words crushed me. My own child saw me as the cause of sorrow rather than joy. From then on, everything I did seemed to backfire. If I scolded them, they ran to Thomas. If I tried to discipline gently, they ignored me. I was becoming a stranger in my own home, reduced to the role of caretaker rather than mother. The night Thomas told me he was considering moving the family abroad, Emily's reaction sealed my fate. "Yay! Daddy, can we go soon?" she shouted, her face glowing with excitement. "And Mommy?" I asked, my voice trembling. Emily looked at me, then back at Thomas. "Do we have to take her?" Her words were innocent in tone, but deadly in meaning. Thomas didn't correct her. He didn't say, "Of course Mommy is coming." He just stayed silent. And in that silence, I realized the truth. My children no longer saw me as their mother. The betrayal of a husband is one wound. The betrayal of your own children, whether intentional or not, is another altogether. Their little eyes, once filled with love, now looked at me with doubt, confusion, and distance. I had lost them. And in losing them, I understood that my punishment had only just begun. The announcement didn't come as a family discussion. It wasn't a warm evening around the dinner table where dreams of a new life abroad were shared. No, like everything else that had slowly unraveled in my life, it came in whispers, half-truths, and deliberate silence. I first noticed the signs when Thomas started receiving late-night calls. He'd step outside, speaking in hushed tones. His laptop became his constant companion, documents and emails flashing across the screen before he quickly closed it whenever I entered the room. At first, I convinced myself it was just work. But the unease in my chest grew. Something was happening, and I was on the outside looking in. The truth revealed itself one Saturday morning when Emily rushed into the living room, clutching a glossy brochure. "Daddy! Daddy! Look at the schools in London. They have art clubs and soccer teams. I want to go there." London. The word hit me like a blow. "What schools?" I asked, reaching for the brochure, but Emily pulled it away. "Daddy said we're moving. He said it'll be better for us." I turned to Thomas, my voice trembling. "Moving? Since when?" And why wasn't I told? Thomas set down his coffee mug, his expression cold, calculated. Because I wasn't sure how to tell you. The children and we're leaving. It's already in motion. My heart dropped. The children and you. What about me? His silence was louder than any words. In the weeks that followed, I became a ghost haunting my own home. The children were brimming with excitement, packing, making lists, showing each other pictures of neighborhoods, schools, and parks overseas. They included Thomas in every conversation, but never me. When I tried to join in, asking what neighborhood they were moving to or which school they'd chosen, Emily shrugged and Daniel avoided eye contact. Thomas never corrected them, never reminded them that I was still their mother. Instead, he let the divide widen, brick by brick. One evening, I confronted him in the kitchen. Thomas, you can't just take my children away. I'm their mother. I deserve to be part of this decision. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. You lost that right the day you betrayed me. You gave me no choice, Sarah. The kids deserve a fresh start, away from the mess you created. Tears burned my eyes. I made a mistake, but I'm still their mother. You can't erase me from their lives. Watch me, he said coldly. The betrayal was staggering, not just as a wife, but as a mother. I had carried those children, endured sleepless nights, kissed scraped knees, and held them through fevers. Yet now, they looked at me like I was a shadow, irrelevant to their future. Emily once told me, Daddy said things will be happier there. No more fighting. Just us and him. The words gutted me. I wanted to scream, there is no fighting. There's only silence. A silence your father has chosen. But I swallowed my pain. The day they packed the suitcases, the house felt like a funeral. I stood by the doorway, watching Thomas fold Daniel's shirts neatly, Emily stuffing her favorite dolls into her pink suitcase. They didn't ask me to help. They didn't even look at me. Where exactly are you going? I finally asked. Thomas zipped up his bag and glanced at me with disdain. England. A friend of mine helped arrange the move. We've got a house waiting. I knew then it was Nicholas. Who else could it be? His presence lingered like a ghost, even when he wasn't in the room. On the morning of their departure, Emily hugged Thomas tightly. Daniel clutched his father's hand, his eyes sparkling with excitement. When I bent down to hug them, Emily pulled away quickly, muttering, "We'll see you later." Daniel gave me a brief pat on the shoulder, the kind you give a distant relative, not your mother. The rejection cut deeper than words. At the airport, I begged Thomas one last time. Please, don't do this. Don't take them from me. Whatever we've been through, they need their mother. Thomas's eyes were cold steel. They don't need you. Not anymore. They need stability, and I'll give them that. I reached for Emily, but she clung tighter to his arm. Daniel wouldn't even meet my eyes. The announcement for their flight echoed overhead. My world was leaving me, boarding a plane to a new life where I didn't exist. I watched as they disappeared past the security gates, their figures shrinking until they were gone. Gone. The ride home was unbearable. The house, once filled with their laughter and noise, felt cavernous, suffocating in its silence. I wandered through the empty rooms, their toys abandoned, their beds neatly made as if they had never been lived in. I collapsed on Emily's bed, clutching her pillow, breathing in the faint scent of her shampoo. My tears soaked the fabric until exhaustion swallowed me whole. But as grief consumed me, a strange clarity emerged. They thought they were freeing themselves from me, punishing me with absence. But in truth, they had given me something else entirely. Time. Time to heal. Time to rebuild. Time to plot my own future. I realized then that sometimes, the cruelest rejection can become the sharpest weapon of revenge. They had left me behind, but in doing so, they had no idea what they had set in motion. The first morning without them was unbearable. I woke up instinctively at the sound of silence. No giggles from Daniel racing through the hallway. No Emily shouting that she couldn't find her shoes. No smell of Thomas's coffee lingering in the kitchen. Only silence. The house felt too large, every corner echoing with memories. Their absence was deafening, pressing against my chest until I could barely breathe. I wandered from room to room as though searching for proof they hadn't truly left. Emily's dolls still sat neatly in her closet. Daniel's toy truck was abandoned beneath the couch. A family photo on the mantel showed smiling faces that now felt like strangers. I sat on the edge of the couch and whispered, "What have I done?" But the walls gave no answer. The loneliness was suffocating, and grief came in waves. One moment, I would rage at Thomas for ripping the children away from me. The next, I would collapse into sobs, blaming myself for every misstep, every betrayal, every silence I hadn't broken soon enough. Nights were the worst. I lay in the quiet, staring at the ceiling, replaying the image of Emily clinging to Thomas at the airport and Daniel avoiding my gaze. The rejection of my children haunted me more than my husband's disdain. They were supposed to be mine, my comfort, my second chance at love after losing my parents so young. And yet, they had chosen him. Or rather, he had taught them to choose him. Days blurred together. I stopped eating properly, stopped answering calls, stopped looking at myself in the mirror. But grief has a strange way of giving birth to clarity. One evening, as I sat curled on the couch, I realized something profound. I had spent years being the backbone of this family, yet I had been treated as disposable. Thomas had erased me from his heart. My children had erased me from their trust. And in their leaving, they had forced me into a corner where I had no choice but to stand alone. It was then that a quiet, dangerous thought entered my mind. If they believe I'm gone, perhaps I can return stronger than they ever imagined. The hollow house became my crucible. I began moving through it differently, not as a grieving wife, but as a woman reclaiming her space. I cleared Thomas's side of the closet, bagging his suits and shirts with methodical precision. I rearranged the furniture in the living room, stripping away the remnants of his taste. The home was still empty, but for the first time, it felt like it belonged to me. I wasn't ready to forgive myself, and I wasn't ready to forgive them, but I was ready to stop drowning. One afternoon, as I was cleaning out the attic, I stumbled upon an old box of letters, notes from college, small tokens of Thomas's love when we first met. Reading them, I realized how far we had drifted from who we once were. He had once promised to protect me, cherish me, build a life with me. Somewhere along the way, betrayal had poisoned us both. But while he had chosen revenge through abandonment, I would choose revenge through reinvention. I started with small steps. I enrolled in a local workshop on financial literacy, something I had always wanted to do but never had time for. Being around strangers felt awkward at first, but slowly, I began to enjoy the rhythm of conversation that didn't revolve around my failures. I picked up part-time work at a community center, tutoring children after school. Their innocent questions and eager smiles reminded me that I still had worth, that I still had something to give. And for the first time in months, I laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised even me. But the house, though quieter now, still held shadows. Every time I walked past Emily's room, I thought of her asking, "Do we have to take her?" Every time I passed Daniel's toy truck, I remembered him crying for Thomas instead of me. These memories fueled me, not with despair, but with determination. If they ever saw me again, they wouldn't find a broken, abandoned woman. They would find someone who had rebuilt herself from ashes. The turning point came when an unexpected knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. It was Claire, an old college friend I hadn't seen in years. She had recently moved back to the neighborhood and had heard through whispers about my family leaving. "Sarah," she said gently, "you look like hell. But I also see something in your eyes I haven't seen in years, fire." Her words struck me. Fire. Yes, that was what it felt like. A fire that had been smothered for too long, now sparking back to life. Claire invited me out more often, introducing me to people, reminding me that life existed beyond the boundaries of betrayal. It was through her that I reconnected with Nicholas, the man who had once been my weakness but would soon become part of my unexpected redemption. The hollow home no longer felt like a prison. It had become the place where I confronted my deepest losses, but also where I began to forge my new identity. Thomas thought leaving me behind would destroy me. My children thought choosing him would erase me. But in truth, they had handed me the greatest gift of all, freedom. And I intended to use it. Life has a cruel sense of irony. The man whose shadow had hovered over my marriage for years was the same man who reappeared when I had nothing left. Nicholas. For weeks, I had avoided even saying his name. He represented everything that had gone wrong: temptation, weakness, betrayal. But when Claire introduced us again at a small gathering, I realized something had changed. It wasn't the same Nicholas who had slipped into my life during lonely nights. This Nicholas carried his own scars, his own weight of regret. His eyes, once mischievous and full of charm, now held depth, a quiet pain I recognized immediately. When our gazes met, I expected anger, awkwardness. Instead, he simply said, "Sarah, it's been a long time." We sat across from each other, the air thick with unspoken history. "I heard about Thomas and the kids," Nicholas said softly. "I'm sorry." "Sorry?" I almost laughed. "You were part of the reason everything fell apart." He didn't flinch. "I know. And I regret it more than you can imagine. But I also know what it feels like to be left behind." His words disarmed me. For so long, I had painted Nicholas as the villain in my story. But here he was, broken in his own way. Over the weeks that followed, our paths crossed more often. Sometimes it was at community events, other times because Claire insisted on dragging me out of the house. Each time, Nicholas was there, steady, quiet, no longer the man chasing thrills but one searching for redemption. One evening, as we walked out of a cafe together, he said, "Do you ever wonder why Thomas trusted me so much back then? Why he asked me to look after you?" I froze, my heart pounding. "What do you mean?" Nicholas hesitated before answering. "Because he owed me. More than you ever knew." I stared at him, confused. "Owed you what?" "Let's just say Thomas wasn't always the saint you thought he was. He covered up things that would have destroyed his career. I kept his secrets, and in return, he gave me access, to him, to his family, to you." The revelation sent a shiver down my spine. Could it be true? Had Thomas been hiding sins of his own while punishing me for mine? The more Nicholas spoke, the more my world tilted. He hinted at shady business deals, favors exchanged with powerful men, debts that ran deeper than friendship. Thomas wasn't the loyal, faultless husband I had once believed him to be. He had built a foundation of lies, and I had been too blind to see it. Nicholas wasn't telling me this to absolve himself, he made that clear. "I don't expect forgiveness, Sarah. But I do think you deserve to know that you weren't the only one who made mistakes." For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the only guilty one. Our conversations grew longer, stretching into nights where we walked the city streets, talking about everything: our regrets, our fears, our hopes for the future. One night, as we stood by the river, Nicholas turned to me and said, "Thomas thought leaving you would break you. But he underestimated you. I see it in your eyes, Sarah. You're not broken. You're just beginning." The words lit a spark in me. For so long, I had been drowning in shame. But Nicholas's presence reminded me of something I had forgotten. I was still alive. The shift between us was subtle but undeniable. He began helping me with small things, fixing the leaky faucet in the kitchen, carrying groceries, even repainting the living room when I decided to strip away the last traces of Thomas. But it wasn't just his actions. It was the way he looked at me, not with judgment, not with pity, but with recognition. He saw the woman I was becoming, not just the woman who had fallen. One evening, as we shared a quiet dinner at my house, he asked the question that had been hovering between us. "Do you think you could ever trust me again?" I set my fork down, staring at him. Trust is a heavy word, Nicholas. But maybe I could start with believing that people can change. He nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "That's all I ask." It wasn't love, not yet. What grew between us was something deeper, something forged in the fires of loss and regret. It was partnership, understanding, the quiet acknowledgement that we had both been broken, and maybe together, we could build something stronger. For the first time in years, I felt less alone. But beneath it all, a darker current was forming. The more I learned about Thomas's secrets through Nicholas, the more I realized how twisted the past truly was. Thomas wasn't just a man who had been betrayed. He was a man who had betrayed others long before me. And as Nicholas and I pieced together the truth, I felt something dangerous stir within me. The desire not just to rebuild, but to strike back. If Thomas thought he had won by taking my children and leaving me behind, he was about to discover just how wrong he was. Nicholas had returned. And with him came not just companionship, but the beginning of a plan. The past has a way of bleeding into the present, no matter how deeply someone tries to bury it. For years, I believed Thomas's silence, his coldness, was born solely out of my betrayal. But as Nicholas and I talked, a new picture began to emerge. One that painted Thomas not as the noble victim he pretended to be, but as a man who had been lying long before I ever stumbled. It began with a name. We were sitting in my kitchen late one night when Nicholas leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Do you remember Alan Whitmore?" The name tugged at something in my memory. Thomas's old boss. The one who got caught in that embezzlement scandal years ago. Nicholas nodded. Caught, and convicted. But what no one ever knew was that Thomas wasn't just an innocent bystander. He was involved. He funneled money through smaller accounts, covered tracks, falsified signatures. He was neck deep in it. I froze. That can't be true. Thomas would never. Nicholas's gaze was steady. I was the one who helped him cover it up. He begged me. Told me if I didn't, he'd lose everything. So I lied. I took the fall for parts of it. He walked away clean. I was the one who carried the weight. My heart hammered. If what Nicholas said was true, then Thomas's entire career, our entire life together, was built on lies. "And you never told me," I whispered. Nicholas looked away. "I didn't want to drag you into it. And, to be honest, I thought maybe you already knew. You always believed he was a saint, Sarah. I didn't want to be the one to shatter that illusion." The irony stung. All these years, Thomas had held my betrayal over me like a weapon, while he himself had skeletons locked tightly away. Over the next few weeks, Nicholas shared more pieces of the puzzle. How Thomas had borrowed money from dangerous people during his 20s, desperate to climb faster up the corporate ladder. How he had used charm and manipulation to keep allies close, only to discard them when they were no longer useful. How the move abroad wasn't just about giving the children a better life. It was also about escaping whispers that had begun resurfacing about his past. "Thomas didn't leave because of you," Nicholas said one evening. "He left because his lies were catching up to him. You were just a convenient excuse." The revelation was both liberating and infuriating. For years, I had carried the burden of guilt, convinced I alone had destroyed my family. But now I saw the truth. Thomas had destroyed us long before Nicholas and I crossed a line. He had simply hidden his sins better. I began digging for myself. I spent nights combing through old financial records, searching court archives, contacting people who had once worked with Thomas. What I found made my stomach churn. Shady business partnerships. Sudden bursts of unexplained wealth. A pattern of people, mentors, colleagues, friends, who all seemed to fall just as Thomas rose. It was as if he had built his entire life on stepping stones made of other people's downfall. One day, I sat at my dining table, surrounded by papers and files, my head spinning. "I don't even know who I married," I whispered. Nicholas leaned against the doorway, his voice calm but firm. "You married the mask he wanted you to see. Now you're finally seeing the man beneath it." The more I uncovered, the more the anger inside me solidified into something sharper, something steadier. Thomas had taken my children, stripped me of dignity, painted me as the villain. Yet all the while, he had been hiding a past that could unravel him completely if the truth ever came to light. And that was when the idea of revenge began to take shape, not as a rash outburst, but as a calculated plan. If Thomas thought I was powerless, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Nicholas became my unlikely ally. He still carried guilt for his role in my downfall, but perhaps that was why he was so committed now. He shared contacts, documents, and stories that painted a clearer picture of Thomas's double life. Sometimes, late at night, I caught Nicholas watching me, not with desire, but with a kind of admiration. "You're stronger than you know, Sarah," he told me once. "Most people would have crumbled. You're turning pain into power." His words stayed with me. I began to change. No longer was I the woman pacing through an empty house, drowning in sorrow. I became methodical, organized. Every detail I uncovered about Thomas, I stored carefully, like ammunition for a war I was preparing to fight. And slowly, a vision formed, a day when Thomas's carefully crafted image would shatter. A day when he would feel the same humiliation, the same abandonment, that he had forced on me. One night, as Nicholas and I reviewed documents, I asked, "Why are you helping me? After everything between us?" He hesitated, then said, "Because maybe this is my redemption too. I couldn't save you back then, Sarah. But maybe I can help you now." For the first time, I believed him. The threads of Thomas's secrets were unraveling, and I held them in my hands. He thought he had won by leaving me behind. He thought he had stripped me of everything. But what he didn't know was that in his absence, I had found clarity. I had found truth. And I was beginning to weave those threads into a rope strong enough to pull him down. Revenge doesn't come in a single stroke. It begins as a whisper, a thought so small it almost feels harmless. But when fed with betrayal, loneliness, and anger, it grows roots, deep, tangled, unshakable. By the time I had finished piecing together Thomas's past, the whisper inside me had grown into a roar. I no longer wanted to simply move on. I wanted him to feel what I had felt, stripped bare, abandoned, humiliated. And I was willing to wait as long as it took to make that happen. The first step was control. For too long, Thomas had written the story of my life, provider, husband, father of my children. He had cast me as the weak one, the betrayer, the mistake. But now, I was reclaiming the pen. I started with financial independence. The tutoring job at the community center wasn't much, but it gave me freedom. From there, I expanded, networking with parents, offering private lessons, building a small but steady income. Every dollar I earned was more than money. It was proof I didn't need Thomas to survive. The second step was information. I already had pieces of his past, thanks to Nicholas. But if I wanted to bring Thomas down, I needed more than rumors and whispers, I needed evidence. Nicholas introduced me to an old acquaintance of his, a retired accountant named Gerald who had once worked with Thomas. Gerald laughed bitterly when I mentioned Thomas's name. That man. He built his empire on lies. Always one step ahead, always making sure someone else took the fall. I still have boxes of records from those years. You want them, they're yours. When I carried those boxes home, my hands trembled. Inside them, I knew, were the seeds of Thomas's undoing. The third step was patience. It would have been easy to lash out immediately, to send those documents to the authorities, to expose him publicly. But that would have been too clean, too merciful. No, what I wanted was for Thomas to feel the slow, creeping dread of a life unraveling. To watch his carefully constructed image begin to crack while he tried desperately to hold it together. So I waited. I studied. I planned. During this time, Nicholas became more than an ally. He became my mirror. One evening, as we reviewed papers spread across my dining table, he leaned back and said, "You're not the same woman I once knew." I raised an eyebrow. Better or worse? He smiled faintly. Stronger. Sharper. But also, darker. I looked down at my hands, tracing the edge of a file. Maybe that's what it takes. He took everything from me. If I don't fight back, I'll never get it back. Nicholas studied me for a moment, then nodded. Just make sure you don't lose yourself in the fight. His words lingered, but they didn't stop me. If anything, they fueled me. The first real move I made was subtle. Through an anonymous email account, I sent a single document from Gerald's boxes to a journalist in London, a financial discrepancy tied directly to Thomas's old company. It wasn't enough to ruin him, but it was enough to plant doubt, to stir curiosity. Within days, whispers began circulating online. Nothing concrete, just speculation. But speculation is like smoke. Once people see it, they start looking for fire. I imagined Thomas's face when he read the articles, his mind racing, his paranoia growing. And for the first time in years, I felt powerful. Meanwhile, I continued building my own life. I took on more students, saved more money, and even began studying business management at night. Each step forward made me less of the abandoned wife and more of the woman who had survived. But beneath the surface, the plan was always ticking, each move carefully calculated. One night, lying awake in bed, I asked myself if I truly wanted this. If revenge would fill the emptiness my children's absence had carved into me. The answer came easily. It wasn't about filling the emptiness. It was about balance. About justice. About making sure Thomas couldn't simply rewrite history to make me the villain while he walked free as the hero. If he had taught my children to hate me, I would teach the world to see him for who he really was. The seeds had been planted, in the whispers online, in the files tucked safely away in my drawer, in the strength growing inside me every day. I didn't know exactly when the harvest would come, but I knew it was only a matter of time. And when it did, Thomas would finally understand what it meant to lose everything. As I stood in front of the mirror one evening, staring at the woman looking back at me, I almost didn't recognize her. Her eyes were steady. Her shoulders were squared. She no longer begged for forgiveness or clung to the past. She was ready. Thomas thought he had buried me when he left with the children. But what he didn't realize was that he hadn't buried me at all. He had planted me. And now, I was beginning to grow. News travels fast in the digital age. What begins as a whisper on a blog can become a storm by the time it crosses the ocean. For Thomas, the storm began one quiet morning in his new home. He was sipping coffee at the breakfast table when his phone vibrated. A colleague had forwarded an article with the subject line, "Is this about you?" Thomas scrolled down and froze. The headline read, "Former executive linked to questionable financial practices in London-based firm." His name wasn't mentioned directly, but the details were too specific to ignore. The dates, the projects, the partnerships, it was all him. His hand trembled as he set the phone down. For the first time in years, Thomas felt a familiar weight pressing against his chest. Fear. Meanwhile, I sat thousands of miles away, reading the same article on my laptop. A quiet smile touched my lips. This was only the beginning. Nicholas called that evening. "Did you see it?" "I did." "You've rattled the cage. He won't show it, not to his family, not to his colleagues, but inside, he'll be spinning." "Good," I said simply. Nicholas hesitated. "Sarah, you need to be careful. If he suspects you're behind this." "He won't. He thinks I'm too broken, too pitiful to fight back. That's what makes this so sweet." For a moment, silence filled the line. Then Nicholas chuckled softly. "You're not the woman I remember." "No," I agreed. "I'm stronger." But even as I savored Thomas's unease, a part of me still ached. My children. They were with him, far away, no doubt absorbing his version of events. Did they believe I was the villain? Did they read the same articles and wonder if the man they called father was hiding something? Or were they too sheltered, too devoted to him, to question anything at all? The thought burned, but I pushed it aside. Revenge first. Healing later. Across the ocean, Thomas began damage control. He called old contacts, pressed for reassurance, tried to smother the fire before it spread. "This is nothing," he told his business partners over video calls. "A smear campaign. Someone jealous of my success." But behind closed doors, his mask slipped. He paced his study late into the night, rifling through old files, trying to anticipate what else might surface. The man who once mocked me for being emotional now found himself unraveling with paranoia. And I loved every second of it. Still, I knew this wasn't enough. A single article wouldn't topple Thomas. He was too practiced, too slippery. I needed escalation. So I sent another file, this one more detailed, tied directly to a shady contract he had signed years ago. The journalist replied within hours, "This is explosive. Are you sure it's authentic?" I wrote back, "Absolutely." Within a week, a second article dropped. This time, Thomas's name appeared in print. The echo was louder now. Nicholas came over the day it went live. He found me sitting in the kitchen, staring at the glowing screen. "You've just lit the match," he said quietly. "I know." He pulled out a chair and sat opposite me. "And how do you feel?" I paused, searching for the right word. Alive. Nicholas studied me, his expression unreadable. Just promise me you won't let this consume you. Revenge is a dangerous fire. It can warm you, but it can also burn you down. I met his gaze. Thomas took my life from me. If I burn, at least I'll take him with me. Nicholas didn't argue, but I saw the concern etched in his face. Meanwhile, Thomas's world grew smaller. Investors pulled out of deals. Clients grew distant. His once loyal colleagues whispered behind his back. Even at home, tension simmered. "Dad, why are people saying these things about you?" his eldest daughter asked one evening. Thomas forced a smile. "Lies, sweetheart. People love to tear down those who succeed." But she didn't look convinced. And for Thomas, that was the most dangerous crack of all, the erosion of trust within his own home. From afar, I watched. I didn't reach out to my children, not yet. I wanted Thomas to stew, to feel the walls closing in, to know that the fortress he built was crumbling under invisible hands. Every night, before I closed my eyes, I whispered the same words to myself. He thought he left me broken. But I am the storm he never saw coming. As weeks passed, the echoes grew louder. Small mentions in international outlets. Subtle shifts in tone during his meetings. Even his closest friends began keeping their distance. And I knew this was only the beginning. The ocean between us no longer felt like a barrier. It felt like a stage. He was performing for the world, trying to maintain his image. And I was pulling the strings. For the first time in years, I felt power flowing through me, not borrowed, not dependent, but truly mine. The woman who had once begged for love, who had been discarded like a burden, was gone. In her place stood someone new. Someone patient. Someone relentless. And across the ocean, Thomas was finally hearing the echoes of the storm I was about to unleash. Revenge is not a single act. It is a symphony, each note building toward the last, thunderous crescendo. For months, I had played my part with precision, releasing whispers, planting doubts, feeding the storm. But now, it was time for the final curtain. It was time to end this. The plan was simple in design, devastating in execution. The documents Gerald had given me weren't just scraps of evidence, they were a roadmap of corruption spanning years. Bribes, false contracts, offshore accounts, even stolen investments from people who trusted Thomas. If the first articles had rattled his cage, the full package would burn it to the ground. And I knew exactly where to send it. Not just to journalists this time, but to regulatory boards, law enforcement agencies, and key financial watchdogs in both the US and the UK. When I hit send, my hand didn't shake. For the first time in years, I felt steady. News broke like wildfire. Businessmen under federal investigation for fraud and embezzlement. Families speak out against executive who ruined lives. Thomas's face was everywhere, on television, online, in papers. Once praised as a visionary, he was now painted as a predator. I imagined him sitting in his study, surrounded by headlines, his phone buzzing with unanswered calls, his children looking at him with questions he could no longer deflect. I pictured the panic, the rage, the helplessness. And I savored it. Nicholas came over the night the first official charges were announced. He found me on the couch, watching the news in silence. "It's done," he said quietly. I nodded. "Yes. And how do you feel?" I exhaled slowly. "Free." He studied me, as if searching for cracks. "Not empty." I thought about it. For years, I'd feared that revenge would leave me hollow, that the fire consuming me would die out and leave only ashes. But as I sat there, watching Thomas's empire crumble, I didn't feel hollow. I felt whole. Across the ocean, Thomas fought like a drowning man. He hired lawyers, denied every allegation, lashed out at colleagues, cursed old friends who refused to defend him. But the tide was too strong. When the authorities raided his office, confiscating files and computers, the footage played on every major news network. His children watched. His neighbors watched. The entire world watched. The man who had once prided himself on control was now a spectacle of disgrace. For me, the most satisfying moment came weeks later, when a journalist contacted me. We've heard rumors that you were connected to Thomas's past, she said. That you may have insights into his personal life. Would you be willing to speak? I smiled faintly. Off the record, I replied. And I told her just enough, how he had abandoned me, how he had poisoned my children against me, how he had built his image on lies. When the article was published, it didn't just expose his crimes. It painted the picture of a man who betrayed not only his business partners, but his own family. The narrative was complete. One evening, I sat alone in my living room, the house quiet, the storm outside finally calming. On the table beside me lay a photo of my children. Smiling, innocent, taken years before Thomas had turned them against me. Would they come back to me now? I didn't know. Perhaps not. But for the first time, that uncertainty didn't crush me. Because I had reclaimed myself. I was no longer the abandoned wife, the broken mother, the woman begging for scraps of affection. I was Sarah, the survivor, the storm, the woman who had brought a man like Thomas to his knees. The final curtain fell not with a scream, but with silence. Thomas disappeared from the headlines, his name buried beneath new scandals and fresher stories. But for those who knew him, for his children, his colleagues, his enemies, his downfall would never be forgotten. And neither would mine. Because in the ashes of his empire, I had built something new. Not just revenge. A life. Nicholas visited less often after that. The fight was over, and in some ways, so was our bond. He had been my ally in the storm, but now that the skies had cleared, we both sensed it was time to step back. You don't need me anymore, he said one evening. I smiled softly. I never did. But I'm glad you were here. We parted not as lovers, not as conspirators, but as survivors of the same war. I often wonder if Thomas thinks of me now, sitting in some rented apartment, stripped of his wealth, his pride, his legacy. I wonder if he finally understands the truth, that when he left me behind, when he convinced our children I was worthless, he wasn't destroying me. He was creating me. The woman capable of ending him. As I stood at my window one night, looking out at the quiet streets, I whispered the words I had carried for so long. You thought you buried me. But you only planted me. And look how I've grown. The final curtain had fallen. And the stage was mine.